Revolution's third, a scripted word, and seen but not heard. It's October 1997, and this is Yesterzine. The fifth generation of home consoles is well underway. The great battle between the titans of Sega and Nintendo, and the deep-pocketed upstarts at Sony. Surely this was going to be the most competitive video game generation of all time. It didn't work out that way though, did it? By late 1997, the Saturn and PlayStation were 2 years old in the UK. The N64's hilariously belated release is just 6 months ago. Edge reviews 8 games in this issue. The PlayStation would get versions of 6 of them. The N64 and Saturn, just 2. Plus, while the PlayStation didn't get this mystical ninja game, it got several of its own. So the only world from this issue a PlayStation owner didn't have access to was Tetrisphere. And, you know, you're alright, mate. And while this is in our mind as we pick up Edge's celebratory 50th issue in October 1997, we're going to play 2 games today. We're playing neither of them on the big 3. Edge is still going at the time of writing, the longest running UK games magazine. There's reason for that. Edge was the grown-up magazine before the average age of magazine buyers started to rise towards a level known roughly as "ow my knees." And while Edge did, and does, have an occasional tendency to broadcast live from inside its own rear end, its longevity is deserved. This month, for example, we'll see a gaming legend's take on how the generation is going. We'll play an adventure game icon, and we'll see a home console that never was. But first, to borrow a phrase, a look at the packaging. Because this is issue 50. It's a bit special, with a free CD of game videos and fancy gold wrap, ruined only by sponsorship from Ocean. Once the most prolific and high-profile publisher in the UK market, Ocean was now owned by Infogram, and a mere 4 months from extinction as a name. This was an absurdly busy time in home gaming, but just starting to show signs of the consolidation that's led to the mainstream games industry of the 9th generation being 2 near identical pieces of hardware from consumer electronic mega names, and 1 handheld using an underclocked mobile phone chipset from nearly a decade ago. For instance, I said we'll see a home console that never was, and amazingly I'm not referring to the one that opens the news section. What was then known as the VM Labs Project X did somehow turn into a product that people could just about purchase. Nuon, as it was eventually known, became gaming technology in DVD players. In some respects, this was ahead of its time. After all, a lot of people would end up buying PlayStation 2s because of its DVD player capabilities. The key though was that people actually wanted PlayStation 2s, and the Jaguar had already proved that even an excellent Jeff Minter version of Tempest wasn't a system seller any time after about 1990. The one remaining viable gaming computer is the PC, and it's catching up. While the PlayStation's hardware 3D tricks had given it the edge, this was now arriving in cost-effective form for the beige box. Of the gamer-focused cards, Videologic's new PCX2 was going to be just £115, although the Power VR, as it was marketed, would not win the PC wars. However, it's more likely than you think that you've used the technology, especially if you've ever seen this intro. The problem Videologic had was the market leader, 3DFX, who, with Microsoft's Direct3D still not fully developed, had a huge advantage with their custom Glide API. Despite a 3DFX costing £160, they would own the next couple of years. Edge, inadvertently though, highlighted their impending doom. They talk about comparative speed tests, which were not won by PowerVR. They were not won by 3DFX. They were won by a card called the Reaver 128 from some plucky upstarts called Nvidia. The Reaver was already quicker, and was promised to extend that lead further with forthcoming new motherboard tech. If you're still lost, that promise would be fulfilled fully with the Reaver's replacement, a little card called GeForce. PowerVR weren't even third. They were also beaten by the ATI Rage Pro. Again, this might not mean a lot to you, but if I told you ATI were ultimately folded into AMD, and Rage would become the slightly less combative Radeon, you might twig. If you haven't, but own any Xbox or PlayStation made in the last decade, then ask that to tell you, because there's one in there. It's pretty much here the PC-ification of consoles begins. The forthcoming Dreamcast used PowerVR. The 2002 original Xbox uses a GeForce derivative. The PlayStation 3 a slightly more distant relative of same. The GameCube has a cousin of the ATI Rage. And today, alongside those two AMD-powered consoles, the decade-old mobile chipset in the Switch, it's made by Nvidia. Over in Japan, it's game show season. Edge claimed to have evaluated 151 PlayStation titles promised for exhibit, and decided only 4 of them are worth talking about. Can't argue with them on Metal Gear Solid at least. I might choose to argue with them about their choice of Chocobo de Battle, which was the opposite of a smash hit, in that it was cancelled before release. They deigned to talk about just 3 of the Saturn's 100+ games as well. One of those being X-Men vs Street Fighter, the effective sequel to this issue's only Saturn review, Marvel Super Heroes, and one that would hit the Saturn a mere 10 weeks after that game in Japan. Although such was the UK decline of the Saturn, that while we saw a PlayStation version here the next year, the Saturn one never reached us. Nintendo had their own show, but not with blackjack and hookers, because this is still the Nintendo that didn't believe either of those things existed. Just the 26 N64 games, and with the greatest respect to our friends Kemco from last episode, Top Gear Rally was never going to be the lead title for any console. Unlike the earlier Top Gear games, this was written by Boss Studios, who were responsible for quite a few good racing games in their short life. They also gave us this, which is fondly remembered by exactly 2 people. On the plus side, the other one is probably watching. Further evidence of the Saturn's issues is evidenced by them accidentally revealing that their big coin-up Virtua Fighter 3 would not make it to their not even 3-year-old console. Sega denied those reports, despite the fact the evidence had been written by their own staff. They were accurate reports. The home didn't see VF3 until Dreamcast. An accelerator add-on for the Saturn would be canned alongside it. Yes, Sega seriously considered repeating the 32X farce. Conversely, the memory expansion card, which did happen, made the Saturn the machine of choice for the 2D fighting game addict for some time to come. Capcom had even confirmed they'd use it for Street Fighter 3 on the machine. They didn't. It too had to wait for Dreamcast. In contrast, the next page is a good news story for PlayStation. Final Fantasy went next generation, and in America at least, where they had a lot more experience with Final Fantasy than we did at the time, they predicted the largest ever launch of a video game, having shipped 750,000 copies in the US. It does show you how much bigger the industry is now though. About 10 years after this, Call of Duty Modern Warfare would hit 5 million across the US and UK on launch week. The likely winner these days is Grand Theft Auto 5, which sold 16 million worldwide in week 1, on its way to 180 million and counting. Speaking of GTA, the imminent launch of the first game is being used to illustrate this month's hatchet job on video games. The forthcoming study from Birmingham University called The Effects of Video Violence on Young Male Offenders was not even known to mention video games at the time, but for some reason Edge chose to spend half a page wildly speculating, but what if it does? How can we ever know who was right? If you're a Yesterzine old-timer, you know what's coming next. Yes, I found the report, eventually published in early 1999. Yes, I have checked. Video games are mentioned exactly twice in its 375 pages. Once as an example of one of the media types throughout history that's been blamed for everything, in a paragraph that also mentions comic books. It also uses the phrase technologically advanced modern times, which really suggests a student trying to hit a word count. The other mention is in the conclusion, suggesting the charmingly monikered computer games and interactive video be researched later by someone else, not here. So someone else has to research a computer game. Let's make it us. You say you want a revolution, sung the Beatles, and in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, I can only assume they were talking about you specifically. Luckily, I can oblige with British adventure game pioneers Revolution Software. Look, you try and come up with original intros when you're at episode 54. We've seen them before on this show, but it was a long time ago. In episode 1, they were releasing their first adventure, Lure of the Temptress, to a very reasonable reception. Unfortunately, they chose to release it the same month as Monkey Island 2. From there, we leap forward 3 episodes and 2 years to Beneath a Steel Sky, the seminal comic book style adventure that made their name. It's my favourite adventure game ever that wasn't made by Sierra or LucasArts, which is honestly much more of a compliment than it sounds like it is. Then we forget about them for 50 episodes and 3 years. Chronology on this show can be weird. While we were playing Fast and Loose with Causality, they made the game everyone actually knows them for, Broken Sword. The explicit plan for Sword was to make an antidote to the fact that most adventure games at the time were comedy ones. Not only the LucasArts ones, but also Brit adventures like Simon the Sorcerer and of course Discworld. They also wanted to make something that came much more from a film angle. Not in the Night Trap style of interactive movie, but more in terms of forming a story. And as such, Sword begins with a bang. Caught up in the bombing of a cafe in France, American lawyer and tourist George Stobart chooses to investigate, quickly meeting French journalist Nico Collard. Nico isn't playable in the original version of the game, but extra plot added to the 2009 remaster adds interactive scenes for her. While welcome, the game now starts with her inadvertently being at the scene of a murder, somewhat diminishing the impact of the cafe explosion intro. Overall, it's still probably the version to have. They went back and fixed a few of the sillier puzzles. But more controversially, the game was edited for age rating purposes. It's relevant because while I did play Broken Sword at the time, I have not played the remaster or any of the sequels. And that's relevant because it's the second game that's the only 9 out of 10 in this issue of Edge, and thus what we're looking at. I'm making an executive decision immediately. 2 also got a director's cut remaster, although the changes aren't as comprehensive. If you've never played this and you're considering it, then surely skipping to that is exactly what you're going to do. It's what I'm going to do. The basic plot premise is George is back in town after 6 months, and having received a Mayan stone in the post, Nico has him tag along on a planned visit to an archaeologist. This is a trap. Nico is kidnapped and George finds himself tied to a chair in the world's least ambitiously on fire house, and cornered by a spider which just seems like rubbing it in. It's at this point you get control, which is more than can be said for George. Standard adventure game logic applies, and it's a neat trick to fix you in place for a bit to narrow the search space for new players. Firstly, the bookcase is held up on one side by a loose block of wood. You'll notice the interface is super simple. No verb list, no picking of actions even, just the obvious correct thing being done by highlighting an object. The obvious in this case being kick the bloody thing over to solve our little arachnid issue. This exposes the wall mount, which we can obviously use to escape and win our semi-freedom. You know, if being trapped in a room that is on fire is considered any kind of freedom. We retrieve Nico's handbag and needs must have a bit of a rummage, finding at least one unusual item.
And a pair of nylon panties with a large love heart emblazoned across the front.
We are definitely in full quality of life era for point and clicks here. There's hotspot highlighting to go with those very simple interaction controls. I get a break when I accidentally try the tequila, although it takes me several minutes to realise the worms dropped on the floor. We also discover the origin of the panties with a note from a prospective date. Seems rather forward to me, but hey, maybe that's how they do it these days, in 1997. George seems curiously unworried by the fire, but then somehow it's not spread at all in the last 5 minutes. and nor does it as we continue to search, discovering the gas-powered soda device, but no gas. The pause screen hints are welcome, but rarely useful, here suggesting the powered thing without power should perhaps be equipped with power. We find said power by using the poison dart to open a locked cabinet, but it's too hot to pick up. The obvious move is to co-opt the multi-use undercrackers, prompting a phrase I've only previously encountered in your mum's attempt to write romance fiction.
The panties I'd found in Nico's bag were just what I needed to wrap around the hot cylinder.
With that, we put the fire out of its misery, and pausing only to award it a D- and a could do better, we can now exit the room. A first point and click logic inconsistency though. George won't touch the doorknob, so he just kicks the door in. Both meaning he's forgotten about the panties, and that he could just have done that to the cabinet in the first place. It reminds me we're still dealing with 90s adventure game logic at least. The thing is, even with my flailing about, this is less than 15 minutes into the game, and I'm 8% finished apparently. I assume puzzles are going to get harder, areas bigger, and the story more comprehensive, but if you multiplied that out, this is a less than 4-hour game. I never like to go too far into a game, especially one with a story on this show. What's the point of me telling you to seek out something that no longer contains any surprises? But I'm going to sneak a little further on this one. Let's do the conclusion first though. This and the first one are still lovely little adventures. If you have originals sitting around, they work in ScumVM. If you don't, then it's even easier. The copies on GOG cost $5 a game. They come with both the original and director's cut versions in both cases. Even if they really were 5-hour games, and I suspect in practice they're not, then that's perfectly fine value for a couple of lazy Sunday afternoons gaming. And with that said, feel free to hit the next chapter button and we'll talk PlayStation. We have no other leads, so the next step is to phone the panty guy. For some reason, rather than remove ourselves to a place of safety, we decide to do this from the phone in the hall of a house that was recently on fire, that contains at least one deadly spider, and that is owned by a man who recently knocked us out and left us to die and could presumably return at literally any time. Showing similar life choice evaluation, we agreed to meet our new friend at a cafe that has not yet exploded. We get there before Arnold summers, and run into the one puzzle I've encountered so far that irritates me. You're stuck in a chair again, chatting to an ex-policeman we already know. One of the only interactive bits is his flask, which, clearly, we're going to be swiping. But there doesn't seem to be a good opportunity to do so. It must be the plan though, because there's very little else we can do. The waiter ignores us, and other than a chat with the guy himself, it's the only interactive thing in range. The answer is irritating. You need to talk to the waiter for a second time, at which point he stops ignoring you, brings you a coffee, and our new friend shows up. Asking you to repeat actions which already failed is an adventure game no-no, because the game's just told me if I'm stuck and have blindly tried everything, the answer might be to blindly try everything again, rather than to be in any way clever. In the event, you do need that flask, but you need it in about 15 minutes after you've had this discussion, followed it up at the nearby art gallery, and come back. Then, new conversation prompts cause the guy to facepalm, and you can yoink what turns out to be absinthe. This allows you to get the idiot patron blackout drunk at the art gallery, so you can get a lead on the source of the mysterious stones. Although in a twist, this involves performing what appears to be a successful action a second time. After doing the cafe and gallery tasks and watching a cutscene of a kidnapped Nico being threatened, I'm now 15% through the game in what I would still class as under an hour of actual interaction, even with spending way too long before thinking to repeat the action with that waiter. So that's now a 6-hour game. Certainly that's long enough for today's price, and these two are worth going through. From here there are 3 more games, but since the third marks a transition to 3D, let's wait until one comes up in a future magazine to see if that means they ruined it, and we'll join our spoiler-shy friends who seem to have caught up with a famous face. If you're a gamer of the PlayStation generation, you need to know one name: Ken Kuturagi. It may not be familiar to you, but if you've ever played and loved a Sony machine, you owe him thanks. Because the PlayStation was not some grand corporate product. If corporate had their way, then it wouldn't have got within a million miles of existing. If you're a gamer of the Xbox generation, you also need to thank him. Microsoft's entire console odyssey essentially occurred because they were worried about the capabilities of the PlayStation 2 and its likely incursion into their dominant position in the home. But also, if you're a gamer of the Nintendo generation, or at least the Super Nintendo generation, then he is at least a lesser deity to you as well. Let me explain. Ken was an engineer in Sony's digital research labs from the mid-70s. By the 80s, he had a good reputation as both a current problem solver and a future problem predictor. Among his works have been early LC displays and digital cameras. Yes, in the 1980s. By this time, he also had a family, and like a lot of 80s Japanese kids, his daughter had a Nintendo Famicom, the original Japanese incarnation of what European kids know as the NES, and Americans also know as the NES but are too cool to be seen saying it like that. Ken's other trait was being a risk-taker and agitator in a way that is not generally appreciated by Japanese employers. This meant that he somehow managed to build a relationship with Nintendo, even to the extent of winning the contract to supply the sound chip for the NES's successor, without at any point thinking to tell any of Sony's management about this. Ken designed the SPC 700 for what the Japanese call the Super Famicom, which the Europeans know as the SNES and the Americans as the SNES, which of course stands for SNES NES ES. I said you should all remember one name, but really there's two. The Sony board found out, and Ken would have found himself out of Nintendo, possibly face first, if it wasn't for the personal intervention of CEO Norio Oga. The SPC 700 went ahead, and if you've ever heard a Super Nooper make a noise, then you've heard the earliest video game work of the man who would go on to be called the father of PlayStation. You may know the next part of the story. Nintendo hired Sony, or rather Ken, to help out with a CD add-on for the SENS. He again forgot to tell the board. The board again found out. Oga bailed him out a second time. The plan was for a Mega CD style plugin for existing systems and a Sony branded standalone unit, which was to be called the PlayStation. Everything was ready. Nintendo organised a big press conference and announced they were working with Philips instead, which gave us virtually nothing except this.
This is illegal, you know. My cakes will burn!
Can never see that enough. However badly they handled it, you could see Nintendo's point. The deal with Ken gave Sony creative and IP control over the Super CD format. Nintendo were essentially branding on someone else's games machine. Masterful from Ken in many ways, except thinking that there was any chance Ninty wouldn't notice. While the Philips deal never actually produced a proper console, the situation was massively embarrassing for Sony, and especially for Ken. Amazingly, he wasn't fired. Amazingly, Oga wasn't, when not only did he protect Ken, but also produced a few of the machines, and somehow got Nintendo's permission to do so during a dispute over the ownership of the PlayStation name. And then, after they thought for 2 seconds about the concept of producing a clone of a machine sold at a loss, without being able to make any software money out of it, and still with the support of the CEO, they dropped to space and started developing their own CD-based console called PlayStation. I mentioned most of the last 3 minutes because when we talked to Ken 3 years after the initial Japanese release of the machine, and just after his promotion to head of Sony Computer Entertainment America, he follows the corporate line and says absolutely none of this. Also, his daughter has become his son. And he mentions being very impressed with the 16-bit Nintendo, while entirely failing to mention he designed an incredibly vital component of it. Knowing at least the basics of the story as you now do, judge the accuracy of the answer to the next question.
So, when did you start work on realising this dream?
We started the project at Sony in 1986. To begin with, there were just me and 2 other people, just 3 guys, and then eventually we formed Sony Computer Entertainment in 1993.
There's no lie there, but depending on your views on lying by omission, you might suggest it's not all the relevant information. But to be fair, does it really matter? The PlayStation exists, and any doubt that Kuturagi and Ogre were right has long been extinguished. Edge mentioned having previously talked to him 30 months earlier, so I wondered if it expanded on the much more recent story at that point. He had not. But remember that interview, we'll be back there soon.
Which aspect of the PlayStation project was the most difficult to get right?
The objective was a high-performance, low-price video game system which also had a design which was easy to write games for. Balancing these 3 things, performance, price and ease of use, was the hardest thing to get right.
A fair point, and the PlayStation was comparatively easy to write for. In a world where both of its major competitors were serious work to write for, it was a very decent part of the initial success in attracting those developers, especially as a company without a big console pedigree. It's nice to hear Ken being so candid. Normally people in these interviews have a tendency to just regurgitate what they were told to say by the PR team. Ken, always the renegade, can't be swayed by these people and will say what he actually thinks. Anyway, let's see what he said about the same subject 2.5 years earlier.
Which aspect of the PlayStation was the most important to get right?
The objective was a high-performance, low-price video game system, which also had a design that was easy to write games for. Those 3 things were the most difficult to get right.
Oh.
Perhaps the machine's most distinctive feature at the time of launch was its joypad. What was the thinking behind its design?
The PlayStation game world is typically 3D, so the controller needs the shoulder buttons to move in 3D space. So we added buttons for the index and middle finger, but realised that this made the pad unstable, so we had to add the grips on the lower part. We probably spent as much time on the joypad's development as we did on the body of the machine. Sony's boss showed special interest in perfecting the final version of it, so it has his seal of approval.
But what about 30 months before that?
The game world is 3D, so it needs the deep directional control buttons. So we added buttons for the index and middle fingers, then realised that it was unstable. Sony's boss showed special interest in achieving the final version, so it has his seal of approval.
You see where this is going. Difficult to know if Ken was just bored of answering these questions and had developed his own script, or if he had one handed to him. The only other source I can find for these quotes is Next Generation magazine reprinting this very interview. Or rather, originally printing this interview because their magazine came out first. Nothing suspicious there, both magazines openly shared editorial. But did they just paste versions of these answers alongside the new questions? Or did Ken really use almost identical words over 2 years apart?
How closely does the finished PlayStation resemble your initial plans?
Well, 100%. The original idea was to make a synthesizer for graphics.
Something that could take a basic graphic and then add various effects to it quickly and easily.
This may be the most important technical legacy of the machine. At launch, PCs were still faster. But as we saw from joint titles like Wipeout and Destruction Derby, the difference was the PlayStation's ability to just do effects. Be it the massively atmospheric lighting in Wipeout, or buffering the graphics output to layer it on the TVs in Destruction Derby, the PlayStation versions look much better than on PC. And importantly, also better than Saturn. The main TV on the Saturn version shows a Sega logo rather than the ongoing action, although you'll be hard pressed to notice because it doesn't appear until you're pretty much on top of it. The positions display at the start line is also missing. In any case, let's skip forward to the things Ken obviously couldn't talk about in early 1995. Talking about sales figures, he reveals that they were matching the N64 across the US at the time, despite being on sale a year longer. And that was Nintendo's best market. It was 2-1 in Europe overall, and in Japan, the N64 was only managing 15% of Sony's sales, Sega just 10%.
So in Japan, no one cares about the Nintendo 64, and no one cares about the Saturn.
Ouch. His theories are that Nintendo launched too late, between a year and 18 months behind the other two machines, that the N64 is too hard to write for, and the N64 games cost 9,000 yen, when by this point the PlayStation had what we called the Platinum range in the UK at barely a quarter of that price. Interestingly, while the names are wrong, he makes one spot-on prediction.
So, what technological innovations do you think that gamers will see in the next 10 years?
The next PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation X or whatever, or Nintendo 128, or some kind of Windows 95 compatible machine from Microsoft?
Even Microsoft didn't know they were going to make the Xbox in 1997, but the X in its name comes from the Windows 95 DirectX game libraries that did for PC development much of what the PlayStation did for console dev. Ken had correctly identified one of the two biggest threats on the horizon. He missed the more important one though.
The most dramatic new benefit and revolution will be in the synthesizing of human characteristics and creating a more human environment.
And will you be working on the design of such a machine yourself?
I'm afraid I cannot comment on that.
I can. He would. The PlayStation 3 launched about 9 years after this, and it was indeed Ken's last PlayStation. In it, he weirdly made many of the mistakes he talked about avoiding in the interview. The PlayStation 3 was dramatically overcomplicated and notoriously tricky to develop for. There's a reason your PS5 can natively play games from literally every other PlayStation branded machine, but not the 3, for which it has to rely on unreliable streaming. The PS3 was massively overpriced, around 50% more than the Xbox 360, rather than undercutting people like the PS1 did. And the PS3 was initially a running joke, saved from being the only PlayStation to be outsold by an Xbox only by the strongly partisan Japanese market. Ken was, finally, ushered aside, with American Mark Cerny being effectively the Ken of the PS4 and PS5. After doing the traditional round of non-jobs like honorary chairman, he left Sony in 2011 and has not played a noticeable part in the games industry since. Still, things often end this way, and the fact remains that Ken being a renegade is why you have a PlayStation, why you have an Xbox, and why you loved your SNES. Whichever team you play for, he's being clapped out onto the field to chants of, "There's only one Ken Kuturagi." If there's another single man who has done more to ensure modern gaming looks like it does, I don't know who it is. SNK's Neo-Geo was an incredibly ambitious beast in many ways, and has a reputation as such. But its base is also remarkably conventional. The system was launched in 1990 for the arcades as the multi-video system. Its gimmick was being an arcade machine platform that used cartridges, so a single cabinet could be 6 games, a boon for the space-deprived arcade operator. For 1990, the machine's specs are not as out there as you may have believed. It uses a Motorola 68000 CPU and Zilog Z80 mostly for sound. If this sounds familiar, it is the same setup as the already 18-month-old Mega Drive, although the SNK CPU is a quicker version. They claimed it to be a 24-bit system, and to do so they used a similar loophole to Atari with the 64-bit Jaguar, yet another machine with the same CPU. While low cost was the primary attraction in the arcade, SNK produced a home version too with essentially identical specs. It appeared the next year for $650. That's about $1,500 now, but it wasn't the expensive bit. The games could be up to 330 megabit, about 10 times the capacity of a Mega Drive cart, and since memory was expensive in 1991, this meant you'd be spending anything up to 200 freedom tokens to get one, again about 2.5 times that price today. It was owning your own arcade machine though, and given development costs were largely covered by the arcade money, it sold enough for it to be worth it. The home system was made for 7 years, with SNK stopping production about the time of this episode. Games continued right up until 2004. The problem by 1997 was, it's a superstar 2D system in a world that was pretty clearly going 3D, as Ken had told us. Several times, in fact. The answer, of course, was that SNK tried to make Lightning Strike twice, but this time in 3D. All we need is a sufficiently stupid name. How about Hyper Neo-Geo 64? Excellent. It took a while to get there. The machine had been announced back in 1995 for a 1996 release, but SNK were unable to show anything of it until they announced Samurai Shodown 64 as the first release title for the system early in 97. The arcade system eventually appeared in Japan in this very month. Samurai Shodown wouldn't be ready until December though. The launch game was, unusually for SNK, a driving game called Round Trip in Edge this month, but known in English-speaking territories as Road's Edge. One of the main gimmicks of the Hyper 64 setup was that it could take a bunch of different control types. I'm not sure why this is remarkable. Even in these pre-USB times, PCs had all of these, and the consoles could do most of them. It also feels like it would dilute the concept of machines being able to easily play multiple games. Nonetheless, Round Trip comes complete with a force feedback steering wheel, which SNK for some reason decided to refer to as a reactive handle, which is the stupidest name I've heard since Living Hinge. I want to play Round Trip, but you should know emulation of these games is a little wonky. MAME has two disclaimers for this game, one that the sound isn't right, and another that the game isn't considered to work at all. In reality, it seems to actually run fine to me, although trust me, I've done you a favour by muting it. Between that and the fact I don't own a reactive handle, take this merely as a demo rather than any kind of review. Round Trip is a semi-off-road racing game with courses through various environments, and the 4 playable vehicles are a fictional SNK design and 3 real-life SUVs, including this classic Land Rover Discovery. The USP of Round Trip, and the reason for that original name, is that every course is a trip up to a loop and then back to the start. Like the Sega rallies of this world, while you are racing other cars, your progress is gated merely by the checkpoint times. The other racers, the only traffic on the roads, are significant though, because at least at some point they will be racing the other way down the roads you're trying to use. I can't comment on how well the force feedback would have worked, but even using a keyboard you can tell the handling isn't bad. It's not the quickest racing game, as you might imagine from the cars used, but there is a physics engine under here and a sense of weight. The AI, while rudimentary, is not insane, and the game is smart enough to not over-penalise you when someone hits you coming the other way. A few stages in, you reach the obligatory snow, and that's where the game proves itself for me. You can really feel the change in surface even with this unfair control method. If they got the force feedback right, this could be a hell of a lot of fun in the arcade, and in 1997 such things were a lot less common in the home. It looks the part too, bright and clear with good textures, multiple views and a decent frame rate. The problem you consider though, given the Neo-Geo was always famous for being ahead of the curve, is this successor anywhere past the now 3-year-old pair of Ridge Racer and Daytona USA, or the 2-year-old Sega Rally? Or even Cruisin' USA? And is it even that far ahead of the home versions of some of those, notably Ridge and Rally, which had astonishingly good home ports by this point, even if that was at the second attempt in the case of Ridge? Assuming that home versions would still have to be sold at a premium price, and the planned use of arcade spec hardware suggests it would be, could that still fly? The fact that none of you remember a home Hyper Neo is the answer. It didn't. The home version never happened. Neither, if we're honest, did the arcade machine. When Samurai Shodown appeared in December, that's a third of the total games ever launched already done. There was never an entry for the headline Neo Geo series King of Fighters on the format. Discounting an update to Shodown, there's 3 games in 1998, and then, just 15 months later, the final release for the system in Fatal Fury Wild Ambition. Having given up any hope of a home system, that one got a PlayStation port, but it got a roughly equal reception to Trying to Watch Freeview in Wookiee Hole. SNK was sold in 2000, went out of business the next year, was rescued by a not at all suspiciously set up by its former management company called Playmore shortly after that, and now just sort of exists. The remains are almost entirely owned by the Saudi Arabian government, which is nice. They say you either go out a hero or live long enough to be the villain. SNK's last innovation was apparently to manage both. On the back page is Krzysztof Majserowicz Jasht, but you can call him Chris. Or call him Momentvm, because it's under that name he's released his lovely Amiga-inspired EP Disc Driven. I highly recommend heading to Bandcamp or Spotify in order to pick it up. But I don't need to recommend, because you've spent a good amount of the last 40 minutes listening to it, including the tracks subtitled Angus, Denise and Paula, for which 10 points if you understand the reference. In fact, all the background music in this episode, other than our title theme, is from that EP, and you may also have heard him in the background of videos from Timberwolf, More Fun Making It and others, because Chris is lovely about letting people use his fine work. Still not convinced? Head to his YouTube channel, also Momentvm with a V, for a fine selection of other tracks and hit subscribe there just like you did here. You did here, right? And return at the end of next month for Yesterzine 55 and another magazine lifted, flipped and perused. Goodbye.